BASE and your moderator for today's session with Shannon Miles and Hope Ward. Our panel today will focus on using your time to make your role as an assistant more strategic, with Shannon and Hope sharing examples through their very wonderful partnership. So please join me in welcoming our two panelists. To give you a quick background on who each of them is, Shannon Miles is the COO and co-founder of Miles AG, chairwoman and co-founder of BELAY, co-founder of NoFo Brew Co, and co-founder of Own Not Run. I had to take a breath before I said all of that. She has also
I feel like I need to take a breath too.
I know. She has also written The Third Option, Why a Woman Doesn't Have to Choose Between a Career and Family, but can actually have both and succeed, which, as you can tell, she has done these things, and along with raising two children. We also have Hope Ward here with us, executive assistant to Brian and Shannon Miles, the co-founders of BELAY, a premium staffing company serving businesses all over the US. Hope's career consists of over 15 years of experience in management and operations in multiple industries. And I'm speaking here potentially for Shannon and Brian, but I know her to be an integral part of the success of BELAY, which we will be talking more about in this conversation.
Absolutely.
So Shannon and Hope, it is such an honor to speak with you both. For a bit of backstory for our audience, we got to know, the BASE team got to know the BELAY team in the very early days of BASE. From the very beginning, they have been an incredibly valuable partner to us, as we all do our part in helping assistants shine and really elevating this role as much as we possibly can. And for us, it was a unique challenge because there was no software for assistants before. And so it was just such a joy to get to meet Shannon and Hope really early on, and they just automatically got our vision and what we wanted to do. And Shannon in particular was instrumental in bringing BASE to BELAY. And so just as a quick vouch for working with anybody from the BELAY team, we have so loved every moment of that and are so excited to continue to explore how we can continue to work with one another with all the things that the BELAY team and that really that the Mileses do in general. So along those lines, thank you for always being so supportive of what we're doing at BASE and just getting it. It's a pleasure to work with all of you.
We love it. Our team is, learning from you guys, as you grow your organization, and it's been a real fun partnership to explore. We definitely have similar passion around the world of virtual assistants and share the same view about the power that a great virtual assistant can provide.
So much power. So Shannon and Hope, before we jump into our conversation, I would love to hear a bit from each of you about your roles currently. We'll talk in a minute about how they've evolved since you first started working together. So before we jump into any of that, can you establish for our audience what you're focusing on in the moment? And Shannon, I'll hand it to you first.
Yeah, as you were listing like the companies, I'm like, where am I focused? All over the place right now. No, just this year at the beginning of 2020, I migrated to a new position at BELAY, which effectively meant that I replaced myself and my husband, who's my partner in the business, as CEO with our current CEO, Trisha Shortino. So what that meant for Brian and I is that we moved into the co-chair of the board roles. And what a year to do that, right? And so knowing that we would have some more bandwidth, we decided to start a new organization called Own Not Run. And that is still very much an evolution, but we're settling on it being a content company that helps business owners experience the freedom of owning their businesses and not running them. So basically guiding business owners through the process that we have been able to implement at BELAY, and helping them achieve that level of ownership in their business as well. And you mentioned the brewery. We've got a brewery that just turned 1 year old last week, and it's been remarkable. Our community has really rallied behind it, and it's been a ton of fun. Like, talk about two totally different worlds, from BELAY, the virtual staffing company, to handing somebody a beer, but it has been a fun new challenge to figure all of that out. And Hope is involved in every single one of those initiatives.
Every single company. And I love Own Not Run too. I know I told you this a while ago now, Shannon, but I heard Brian say that on a podcast years ago. of the difference between owning your company and running it, and how that ties into the importance of getting the support that you need where you need it. And it was truly transformational for me and how I approached the business that I was very much running at that
Yeah.
point in time. So it's just such a fun loop that we get to be a part of this with you. Hope, can you tell us a little bit about how all of those changes have shifted your focus today?
Yeah, absolutely. So I, again, like Shannon said, do whatever thing they're doing. It becomes sort of my priority at the same time, but all the while keeping all the other plates spinning as well. So when their focus changes, a lot of times that means the way that they need support from me changes. But in the background, nothing else about what I'm doing to support the other functions can really fall. So it is kind of a magic act in some ways, but it's incredible because it keeps things it keeps things fun and exciting, and there's always something kind of new to be doing and working on. And yeah, it's enjoyable to get to not have such monotony in the day to day. There are so many different things to touch at any given time, and we joke a lot about how I have to go broad, not deep, because it covers so much ground, all the different things that I have to know are going on at any given time. And then also just to keep track of the things that might not be at the forefront, but are still happening. So, but it's fun. It's exciting.
Yes, you are definitely the definition of a strategic partner.
Amen.
Yeah. Okay, so I'd love to go back a little bit, because we know where you are now, and I, as much as it would be wonderful for the world if you could just like snap into that strategic partnership role, we know that this takes time, and roles, just in any role, they tend to evolve. So Hope, I'd love to hear from you about what your role looked like when you first began, and I'll be specific about this, the first evolution of your current role with Shannon and Brian, because I know you all have a bit of a long history there, and how that's evolved into what you do today.
Yeah. So again, when I first stepped into the assistant role to Brian and Shannon, it actually had not been just one person up until that point. And so there had been, an individual supporting each of them. So that was, I would say, the first iteration of this that it was new to all of us. And so going into the partnership from day one, we were like, hey, we're gonna take a stab at doing it a different way and see how that works. So I actually really enjoyed and embraced that, because there was no precedent for me to have to measure up to or whatever. At that point, it was like, hey, we got to make this work the way that it's going to work best for all three of us. And it was nice not to have to compare that to what they had previously known in their relationships with their assistants. So I thought that was a really fun way to start, because we automatically just sort of challenged the status quo and said it doesn't have to look the way that it's always looked for us. So that's, if I could say that a defining characteristic of our relationship is that, like, we will challenge anything and we're not afraid to do that. And so the three of us together, I think, all share that mentality, and we don't mind doing something to step outside of what we might know to be the way it's always existed or what we've been comfortable with thus far. And I think that plays hugely into like our success as a partnership.
I
imagine that. Oh, sorry, Shannon, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, like, Brian and I saw Hope at Belay. She was with Belay for a year in our client success consultant role. So basically the liaison for our virtual assistant engagement. So we got to see her work in a different capacity and also learn about her prior executive assistant experience with high-powered leaders. And so when it was time for Brian and I to replace the assistants that we had, two individuals, we're like, man, Hope is exactly who we would love to work with. And fortunately, she was brave enough to make the transition to support Brian and I 2 years ago. But it was a really special time as we were all three, like you said, trying to figure out how to make all this work, knowing that a lot of what Brian and I do is together, but we're also two very different leaders. So it was almost an experiment at first to say, can one person support us both? And because Hope is as awesome as she is, she's made it work for the last 2 years.
But I often say that thankfully, they are different in the way that they, approach things and the different strengths that they bring. Because I don't know that I could successfully do what I do if they were really the exact same personality. I think it would create more of a conflict, because if they were doing everything similarly or the same, there might not be enough of that part of me to always spread across everyone. So the fact that they approach things differently and they have their own individual ways of showing up, it helps me because I can keep that balance between them.
Interesting. So it's almost like you're able to compartmentalize different strengths or focus areas for each of them. I really like that.
And from a proactive standpoint, I can almost predict how each of them is going to respond to different things. And that helps me share and serve up the right amount of information to each of them when it comes to different subject matters.
That's amazing. How long would you say it took for you to kind of feel settled in that role? I've often heard somewhere in the 12-month mark, but what was that initial evolution like for you to, okay, I'm getting to know you, we've got this experiment, to when you're like, hey, yeah, we're onto something here?
Yeah. I think that within the first 6 months, from a level of just being personally comfortable with each other, I think we got there a lot quicker than maybe some or all do. And that's just, that all depends on personality and relationship and that kind of thing. But I think we achieved that fairly quickly. But I always say it takes 12 months. And I mean, you have to almost experience every season of a year with the person you're supporting in order to really understand like what their lives look like at each of those different points in time. So you got to go through a time when, if they have kids, their kids are out of school or they're traveling, or what is the primary, the thing that they predominantly do during a certain season, if it's holidays or that kind of thing. You almost really have to experience each of those times to get to a place where you can fully know what to expect and also give them the best level of support.
And I think something that added to that period of time of feeling settled and like, okay, I've got this, is Hope not only supports us professionally, but personally too. And so you can't, I think as a leader, you can't just open up the floodgates and dump everything over to your assistant day one and say, good luck. It was a season of phasing in different areas of responsibility so that we didn't overwhelm her, and, that we wanted her to be successful. And so it just took a lot of time, because the scope of things that she helps us with is so vast that it had to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I hear you talking about how important it was to have open communication, to have creativity, especially the more strategic your role got. So you've kind of already answered my next question, but I'd love to hear from both of you any advice really for leaders and their assistants when maybe if they're in a new relationship, or really if they just want to work together more strategically. How do you recommend they get started down that path?
Do you want me to start, Hope?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. I think, first of all, you have to recognize it does take time, and it takes intentionality. It doesn't just happen haphazardly. You have to be intentional to make that migration to a more strategic relationship. I think, like you said, over communicating is key, especially in the beginning, because it helps you identify gaps in knowledge. And then I think the leader especially has to be patient and invest in the training. It is not something that, if you're really letting an assistant into your life to cover a lot of different aspects and not only just handle the tactical things, but eventually become strategic, you've got to allow for time and training. It is a process, but it is worth it. and it's something that pays off in spades. What would you say, Hope?
Yeah, so my head went immediately to the training part, which is sort of, time consuming on the front end, because it's, having to really go, even mentally, you just have to think like how many of these steps do I have to share, with this person, and it starts to unfold itself as you get into training. There's more and more that you have to share in order for them to really know all there is to know and be able to effectively fill their role as a support person. But on the side of the assistant, I would say there is a plethora of things that you can learn that you're not actually being taught. And so that's just, the behind the scenes, the things you're looking out for, the, learning how they respond to things by going through their sent items, learning how they approach things, how they build their time. Just there's so many unspoken training opportunities that they don't ever make it onto a training plan or a list of things that the executive is going to share with you, but you can nevertheless be learning them at the same time.
Yes, I love that. And I think through the lens of Belay, and certainly through BASE, we get a really unique vantage point of what excellent assistants are doing out there. But I think for many assistants, it feels like all of those great tips you just shared have to be learned the hard way. You just have to kind of figure it out on your own, unless you're really lucky and you get a great mentor, someone who's been in the role and can say, look through their sent folder, which is such a good tip, but not always really apparent. How did you happen upon these sorts of things?
Just experience taught me that there was
Right.
always a way to find an answer that's not being served up to you. So I'm by nature an extremely resourceful person, but also it's true, and it also is the way that I used to help. When I was a client success consultant, that I would help my own VAs and clients sort of work well together. So even just, and it's nice to know that that's not just lip service. Like those are actually real things that when I was put in the position of being an assistant, I also did. So I truly do live and breathe by them and believe that those are the best ways. But it is just about, you always want to take the think work out of it. For your client, you always want to be sort of thinking ahead. And so I don't want to wait for them to have to tell me something if there's something I can go find or teach myself or grab a resource that says, I noticed this. Is this something you would like for me to take care of? Because you don't, and the answer might not always be yes, but the fact is that you're looking out for those things.
Hope, do you think any of it too, like, is the collaboration that you have with the other Belay assistants that support the other leaders in the organization? That might be helpful for the audience to hear.
Yeah, we as a group of assistants within Belay, so everyone who serves in an administrative assistant capacity at Belay, we meet monthly as a group, and we just on that meeting share tips and tricks and best practices and things like that. So oftentimes during that time, we do talk through like ways that other assistants could, because all the leaders are different as well. So the people that we're supporting also have very different personalities and preferences, and what works for one isn't necessarily going to carry over and work as the best method for another. So we talk a lot about just the best ways to approach different things and different people and how we can really support each other in that capacity. And that is extremely helpful.
Do you find that group, particularly within the Belay group, that there's a lot of alignment? To your point, everybody's different, but are you saying, hey, we want to make sure that everybody that we're supporting is getting the same type of information from us? Or is there any amount of standardization internally within your group to take out your own think work? Like, how can we make sure we are on this really high level without having to recreate our own wheels internally within each of our relationships?
Yeah, I think one thing that comes to mind for me is we kind of have like a way that we like for responses to happen, sort of the thoughtful approach to how we would want to respond to different things. And as a group of EAs, we've really kind of adopted that together. A lot of it already existed, but some of it was, and it really covers a whole wide variety of different things you would potentially be responding to, but just the approach and how we want, the unified sort of voice of how we would reply and respond to things on behalf of our leaders. And then also internally as well. So like within the organization, when big things have to be communicated from different departments throughout, I think assistants play a big part in making sure that all those communication points are hit the way that we would potentially hit them.
So clearly, Hope, you've got great executives that you support who understand the value of your role and what you can do within their organization. Have you ever been in a situation, or how would you coach somebody who's in a situation where they're maybe having to prove their value through their actions without it? They're having to fight that uphill battle. What would you recommend they do for little ways of surprise and delight to help show the value that they can provide?
Yeah. I think, there's a lot, it can go a long way when you recognize like a calendar conflict or something. You're just looking enough ahead that says, hey, I noticed that you have these things going on. Is this something I can do for you? Hey, I noticed you're going to be running from, meeting to meeting. Can I order you some food? Is there something I can do to take that off your plate? Hey, I noticed there's a couple of things in your inbox that, it looks like I need to make an introduction from this person to this person. Is that something that you're comfortable with me sending on your behalf? Those are things that if you're not being asked to do them, they're still there for someone to do. And there's a very realistic opportunity for you to step up and show that you have what it takes to kind of complete that task.
I love those suggestions. As you were sharing them, I thought of something that just has always meant a lot to me. And it's after I have like an important meeting or something, like exploring a new opportunity or whatever, you will always come back and say, hey, how did that go? How was your time with so-and-so? And as a leader, that just means so much. It means that you want to learn more about those interactions. It means that you care. And, inevitably there are follow-ups that happen too from those interactions that you're involved in. But just the sentiment of, I want to know how it went. I want to know, what the outcome of the meeting was. That has always meant a lot.
I love that so much. I think humans in general want to feel seen and heard. And I think that's one of the best ways to really surprise and delight your executive is to do those personal touches where like just check in with you. How are you doing right now? And that was some of the advice we pushed out in the beginning of quarantine to our community. Like just ask a couple of these questions that are real human personal questions, like how are you right now? Is there anything else I can take off your plate? Because we were all like, what's going on with this world? So Shannon, can you share from your perspective, what should leaders really be looking at their assistants, or how should leaders really be looking at their assistants as a resource? What do you think is like the key takeaway there when approaching this partnership?
I think there are definitely seasons where a lot of the interactions are just tactical, like just some things just have to be checked off the list. But when possible, if you can leverage your assistant strategically, that's when you really start to see accelerations in your business, I think. So looking for ways to really bring the assistant into the fold as your work alongside partner, I think is so key. And that's allowed Hope to start to look around the corners of things. And, we really talk a lot at BELAY about delegating results, not tasks. What is the end result that we're trying to accomplish together? And I'm giving you the authority and the responsibility to achieve that result. How you get there is entirely up to you, because I trust your skill set. I trust your resourcefulness, and I'm here for you if there are any barriers that need to be removed. But this is the result that we're aiming for, and you've got freedom and autonomy to achieve that result. And I think that's key. It's so, it's almost a burden that I see some leaders take on, where they're just handing one task over at a time. And it's like, that is not an efficient way to engage with somebody who can really be a second version of yourself. Like, they're capable of, I think assistants are capable of a lot more than some leaders give them credit for. And an illustration of that is a lot of our leaders at Belay are former assistants. Our CEO, our COO, former assistants. Like, I think once a leader starts to embrace the potential and the capacity of an assistant, the possibilities are endless, really.
Yes, I absolutely agree. And that's part of our big vision at BASE, is really reframing this conversation around what it means to be an assistant and to work with an assistant. And I think that that's something that Belay, both within its internal organization, but also through your large network of VAs, of just having this conversation around how do you work with this individual and integrate them within your organization. And to your point about delegating results, not tasks, I always love when I hear you say that. And it reminds me of some of the steps that must be taken for you to do that. You can't just simply say, go do X, Y, Z. There's so much context that must be shared, and knowledge that you must be invited into in order to really do that. And I believe that that's something that you guys really prioritize there, is including the assistants in the future vision of your organization, and seeing, hey, there's that mountaintop we want to go to over there. You are a very important part of this team, and here's how I see you playing a role in that. Can you talk a little bit about how you see that in your organization, and how you coach VAs to be that type of strategic partner? Either one of you.
Yeah. Hope, do you want to start this time? I feel like I'm leading.
Well, I was just, going to say, one of the reasons why I think our partnership has been successful in the way that it's become more strategic over time, and I'm able to take kind of a bigger role in helping you guys strategically achieve your vision. But it is because you bring me into that conversation, and you've given me the why behind what you're looking to do. And that oftentimes is the biggest piece that someone needs to understand, because understanding the why can really just, create alignment around the vision and where you want to go. And then how you get there, again, you never know, like, that person could really be bringing a lot of really great ideas and resources to the table when it comes to the how. Mm-hmm. When they're given the opportunity, right, to know that information and share that same level of vision and mission. So, and Brian and Shannon have always been great about depicting that and telling people, if you hear from Hope, it's as good as hearing from me, because I'm a complete extension of them. And it has always been so empowering to me to know that that is the way that they feel. And that's also what they share with other people. So it creates a level of confidence in me to represent them. And I think if that is ever missing, it's hard for an assistant to step up and take some certain initiatives, because they don't feel empowered, or like their executive or leader has quite put that level of confidence in them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's almost undermining the role if you don't present them to the team and to outside partners as an extension of who you are. I think the foundation of all of that, and what we coach a lot of our clients around too, is trust. And the speed of trust is directly related to your ability to delegate and have your assistant as an extension of yourself. And so we talk a lot about trust and why it's important. And if there is a missed expectation, that you fill that gap with trust, and then verify, and it's having those open conversations. Hope rarely ever misses anything, and I rarely ever have to ask, so where are we with this? Because she's proactively updating me, and those are just deposits in trust. And it makes me, appreciate, first of all, the vast scope of what she oversees, but also knowing, like, we can go start new things and grow organizations knowing that she's keeping all of the plates spinning. But there have been times too where she's like, okay, I'm at my capacity. So let's have a frank conversation about priorities and bandwidth. And that builds trust too. Because if she had just taken it all on and started dropping some of the plates and missing some of the things, that would have eroded the trust, right? So there have been seasons, and we always joke like, wow, this is a really busy season, but then like it never ends. And so I think this is just the pace at which we work.
This is just life now. Yeah.
I know there it is. It's not a busy season. It's just a busy life. So she has raised her hand and said, I need help. And so she actually has an assistant now that supports her, which I think is been a really fun dynamic to not only have some things taken off of her plate, but also watch her lead. It's been a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm. As I think about Own Not Run and just the implication truly of what that phrase means, I think that delegation is much like a muscle. It is not a given talent to many people. Some people just have that skill set naturally, but most of us have to really work on it. And I think that applies to any level of business. And so I just am so excited to see all of the content and all of the good things that come out of Own Not Run, especially as we watch it trickle down your organization as well. And I bet we could have a whole other session about your relationship with your assistant and how that's empowering you to really own your own role and help you be more of a strategic partner. That's really fantastic.
It's been really great.
Yeah, I know that was so great. And kudos for you for raising your hand and feeling the strength to do that, because I think so many of us suffer in silence when we don't have to. And it's something we've talked a lot about internally at Base as well, because we move at a furious pace. We have to, right? It's what we signed up to do. We are going, yet we are all humans and we all have a life outside of Base. My kids are still really little and I don't want to miss out on that either. So we have this absolute role internally, or just raise your hand. Like most of the time we can solve the bulk of the problems. Maybe we can't, take everything off of your plate, but if you don't raise your hands, we're just going to assume you're fine. And I think the more that we can encourage people to ask for the help that they need, whether that's an assistant getting another assistant or just any real leader in an organization who typically doesn't have an assistant, but surely deserves one, like we need to be raising our hands and saying, I need help. And I think that's where we start to see the cultural shift into people getting like, oh, okay, I don't have to kill myself here.
We don't do martyrdom here. Like we just don't. Like it doesn't help anybody. And, we all work from home too. So it can be really difficult at times to turn it off, and to transition into, okay, it's family time. But I hope you can validate this or not, but like it is as important to us that you're successful professionally as you are personally too. And you should never be put in the position to sacrifice your personal life and your family and your personal goals for the sake of the business. They should be able to work in tandem. And we try really hard to strike that balance personally, to lead by example, and then also to set that expectation for the team.
And it can be very paralyzing, right? To like know your list of things and all the things you need to accomplish. But I think the prioritizing conversation is the one that is most important. It's like reminding your leader, hey, these are all the different things that I'm currently involved in and currently working on. I'm making a decision and I just want your approval. This is something that could potentially wait until next week or within the next couple of weeks. Here are the things that have to happen now. Are you in agreement with that? And again, don't wait for them to tell you. You say to them, here's what I think is the way that we can really break this up and still achieve what we need to achieve within the time frame we need to achieve it.
I love that so much. I heard an analogy the other day of like, we're all juggling all these different things, but some of the things we're juggling are glass balls and some of the things that we're juggling are plastic balls. And that extends through our personal and professional life. So sometimes I might have a professional glass ball and a and a personal plastic ball that I need to drop so I don't break this really important glass professional ball. But sometimes it's the opposite of that. And so I think the challenge is figuring out which balls are which. But if you can do that, then I think for me anyway, it takes away some of the guilt of having to say no, because I think many of us, in particular in this industry, don't like to say no. We are
Mhm.
achievers and we're typically pleasers, and but I think if we're not taking care of ourselves as humans, then there's no way to expect that we're going to be giving it our all in our professional life either.
I wholeheartedly agree. I think that we've all probably worked in jobs that did not see it that way, that work came first and you were available 24/7, and it was a badge of honor to be always stressed out and always overworked. And so when we created Belay, it's like, yes, we're going to work hard, but it will never be to the detriment of why we ultimately wanted to do this to begin with, which was to serve a vision for our family. And we want that for our teams too. So yeah, we at the very beginning of the company didn't do PTO because it was such a small team. And we're like, if you need time off, just take time off. It's no big deal. But what we're finding is everybody was achieving at such a high level, they weren't taking any time off. And then we're like, hold up, we need to implement PTO so that people step away. And you can only roll over so many days. Like, we want you to take that time off and recharge, because I do think that makes you more engaged and successful when you are working.
Yeah, I so agree. We've seen that too in the technology space. Many of startups now just have unlimited PTO and people take way less time off. It's like, no, you need to make sure you're taking at least a certain amount of time off every year, because you're right, people just don't.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm guessing you would agree with this point. And you alluded to this earlier, but would you say that that partnering with an assistant, or ideally multiple assistants, can really unlock growth or enable your organization to grow at a faster pace?
I think it's imperative.
Yeah,
I don't
yeah.
think it's optional, really. If you're in an organization that you have a vision of growth for, then you cannot do it alone. And, having an assistant can be a great, tactical thing. But like we talked about earlier, it can be a great strategic growth thing too. And I think so many assistants, Hope seen it over and over again at Belay, evolve into something more. And I think it's just how we view assistants. Like, and even if an assistant is an assistant forever, that's cool too. Like, there's so much value in that. It doesn't always have to be a stepping stone to something else. But I think regardless of where that role is implemented, you have to have great assistants to grow an organization. It's not an option.
I think leadership can take so many different forms that, yeah, it doesn't matter necessarily what your title is, but are you helping your business achieve its goals? So I'd love to hear, we'll focus on one organization for this question with Belay in particular, but how closely tied are Belay's goals? I'm not sure if you use OKRs or what your metrics are that you use internally, but are assistants tied into that process with their own level of OKRs, or are they directly tied to the executives?
Hope, do you want to take that?
Yeah, no, I think each individual person definitely has their own set of, of goals that are associated with those bigger company overarching goals. So we set those as a company, and then there is kind of, as an individual in your role, there are things you're going to do that are going to impact each of those areas. And so as it relates to you specifically and what you do on a daily basis, there are projects and things that you will be touching and doing that will directly affect each of those areas. So yes, each person has their own individual contribution to that, and then they're also being, measured, but also against the company overarching goals as well. So kind of a trickle down. They start at the top. And
Yeah. I'm beginning to see a pattern with all of the different organizations that we work with, where if you have that alignment and that trickle down or cascade, that's where we really start to see these strategic partnerships flourish. And if there's a disconnect between the assistant and either their executive or the organization's goals, it's rarely as deep of a strategic partnership. Now, sometimes the assistant has to demand that they have a seat at that table or have be able to show their contribution to those goals. But the more and more conversations I have, the more convinced I am that this is the secret key to strategic partnerships, is finding that alignment and then creating the platform or the process for the assistant to say, here's directly how I contributed to those goals. Now, of course, we're big fans of using a digest within BASE to communicate that, but there are any number of ways to say, like, here's what I did. Look at this value. Look at this ROI that I've had.
We use BASE.
Yeah, I know you do.
I use BASE every week. I get an update on all the things.
Yes, we love that. So we are running out of time. So I've got one final question for you, which is kind of a big one. And then I'd love to tell everybody where they can find you if they want to know more about any of the things you have going on. But to wrap things up, what can and should assistants implement today based on our conversation to really help them become more of a strategic partner?
I'll start, but I hope you to wrap it up with. So I think if there's an assistant listening to this who is unclear about what their expectations are for their job, that's the first place to start, is making sure that you are in alignment with your leader about what it looks like to win in your role. What are those things that are most important for you to deliver on? And then how does that support, like you said, the overall organizational goals that are in place? That would be the first step. And then second is, if you don't have a process in place for reviewing that job description and those responsibilities on a regular basis, implement one. At a minimum, I would say every 6 months, hoping I do it quarterly. Because you can just be running 100 miles an hour down a direction that is not the direction the leader thinks you should be going down. And the more intentional you can be about realigning those expectations with your performance, the more successful you'll be.
I agree with all of those things. Communication just being the biggest part of it is finding that, that comfort level with your executive and communicating the things that you see and the things that you love to see happen, and understanding how that works into what they're doing and their vision for things. And also asking them, like, how do you want to receive this information from me? Like, what is the best way for me to come to you, at what time, and when does it make the most sense for you? Because if you have that knowledge, then your approach to that communication will just be that much better. And in the beginning, I always say, like, gaining trust can take time, but proving that you're trustworthy can be immediate. And so that part shouldn't take time, because you can show that very quickly. So the faster that your client becomes, trusting of you, the more information they'll be sharing with you.
I love that. And I know it can feel so scary to ask for feedback, but that's where you really uncover so many of these big insights too. Of, like, even just asking, what time did this timing work for you? Because I think frequently, and from the executive point of view, you're going a million miles per hour too, and it can feel hard to remember all, like, the little things. But if you're asked and you're like, oh yeah, I do remember, like, it's hard for me to read it at 5 p.m. Could you send it at 3 p.m. instead? No big deal, but I just wouldn't have said it unless you asked. So great advice. So we're running out of time. So can you please share with our audience how we can learn more about what you're doing, get in touch, and follow along with your journey?
So if you like beer and you live in Georgia, come to the brewery. But more practically, for BELAY, it's belaysolutions.com to find out more information. There are a lot of free resources out there too that equip people to work from home, lead from home. So definitely check out belaysolutions.com, ownnotRun.com as well. for our newest adventure. And then you can follow me on Instagram at Shannon K. Miles. And how about Hope? Connect with Hope.
Yes, I'm at Hope Walker Ward on Instagram. So.
And shout out to belaysolutions.com. You can also find an ebook that we put out together, Base and Belay, that we've gotten tremendous feedback on it. It's a guide to becoming a virtual assistant, being a virtual assistant. And so if anybody's interested in that, definitely check it out there, because it's been really well received if that's the next chapter of your life. So thank you both so much, Hope and Shannon. This was a pleasure. As always, I really appreciate your time and looking forward to continuing to work with you both.
Thank you, Paige. Thanks for having us on.
Thank you.